thank the LEH for taking an interest in and publishing Everyday Exotic based on a presentation I made last summer at the New Orleans Antiques Forum at the Historic New Orleans Collection. My special appreciation goes to Michael Sartisky, the president of LEH, to David Johnson, the editor of Cultural Vistas, to Brian Boyles, programming specialist, and to Romy Mariano, who provided some wonderful and I think piquant contemporary photographs for the historical images in my article, especially as Ron just pointed out, the cover photograph for this current issue. This brief presentation tonight is meant to just add some additional examples, some additional visual contour, if you will, to the subject that was presented in, or is presented in Cultural Vistas, and for reasons of space that all publications have, that we couldn't include everything as much as the editors would have liked. As with my original talk and in the published article, the primary cultural inspirations informing the subjects of these following slides are Egyptian, Gothic, and Moorish cultures, and this mixture of styles, especially in architectural expressions, appears in both public and private areas in high and popular culture. It's worth noting throughout much of its history, especially after it became part of the United States, New Orleans itself was seen by the rest of the country as an embodiment of the exotic, with its Latin colonial past and other Creole connotations. And so embedding additional references to historic and exotic styles to what was already a pretty non-standard environment could produce some interesting streetscapes and architectural combinations, and that's kind of what I'd like to show you right now. If you go by Cypress Grove Cemetery today at the foot of Canal Street, you'll notice that there are not nearly as many trees as you see in this early 20th century photograph by Morgan Whitney, and in some ways I think that's a shame. Cemeteries, in a lot of their origins, were conceived as these park-like places for both the living and the dead, and the present Cypress Grove, although its architecture still maintains the quality that you see here in these sloping pylons that form the main gate and the flanking pavilions, is a much starker place today than it was when this picture was made. And I just want to show you this. I think it's a wonderful manifestation of this very simple, blocky Egyptian style. The camera I used to make the contemporary photographs did not have the corrections that a true architectural type of view camera would have, and so that sloping sense that you get of the pylons, which exist actually, in fact, they are not truly plumb or vertical, is exaggerated even more by having to point the camera upward to create the picture you see here. The cemetery itself dates from 1840. It was designed by, or the gates were designed by Frederick Wilkinson, and it's one of these things that kind of hides in plain sight in New Orleans. It's there, you see it all the time, but don't often stop to think about what it might have, how it might have been conceived, what it might have been, what was in the thoughts of the people who planned this. And that kind of thought is really what runs throughout the article and these slides tonight, to just really try to get people to notice a little bit of what we often take for granted, and I kind of have worn those out. Within the tomb itself, you see a sort of continuation of this Egyptian theme. Again, the sloping sides of this tomb surmounted by an obelisk, which we associate very strongly with certain elements of Egyptian style. And I show here the tomb design by James Gallier, perhaps built, perhaps not. We've not identified a specific location for this particular tomb, although the form of it that you saw in the previous slide certainly reflects this, again, this sort of Egyptian influence, and especially including, again, the sloping walls, the cavetto cornice of the tomb's entablature, and the obelisk surmounting the whole arrangement. And again, just to show you that gallery was not working in isolation, this is yet another design, probably from the midpoint of the 19th century, but again showing that Egyptian motifs remained a popular form for tomb architecture. I know this is in the article. I just couldn't resist showing it. It's to me the most over-the-top Egyptian building, Egyptian revival building that probably ever existed in New Orleans. It is also a Galliard design, and this picture from the early 1950s by Clarence Laughlin, I think, gives a sense of its sort of unexpected or surprise quality as you might come across it in a streetscape of the Lower Garden District. It's just on the upriver side of Jackson Avenue on Rousseau Street, and in this photograph, it still maintains a lot of that ornamentation. You can see that on both left and right, it's hemmed in by other structures, and the blank walls that you see in this building today are just this kind of unrelieved expanse of brick. So this was a building that was all about the facade. Another example of this Egyptian style is in the sketchbook of Jacques-Nicolas Boussier de Pouilly, showing the Grail family tomb in St. Louis Cemetery No. 2. De Pouilly gives a couple of little variations on it. Grail was an attorney who lived in the French Quarter and practiced in the late 1840s. This is the tomb as it was photographed today in a more substantial kind of granite rather than the stuccoed and painted finish that de Pouilly's original sketches called for. I think either Grail or de Pouilly ultimately realized that a stuccoed brick tomb would not survive the New Orleans climate in the way that something of solid granite would, and so the design was changed. I wanted to just show you that the original talk dealt with things other than architecture, although not very many of them, and these silver candlesticks that are part of the Historic New Orleans collection, again, show this interest in Egyptian symbolism, Egyptian motifs in the decorative arts. These are probably more related to the early 19th century information coming back from Egypt after the Napoleonic battles in the Middle East, including those in Egypt, when you saw this sort of early Egyptomania beginning to spread. And then about a century later, at the time that the pyramids were being excavated in the early 1920s, you get these other kind of examples of popular culture, the Purple Rose of Cairo, sheet music, and a photograph of one of its composers, the violinist and New Orleans band leader Armand Piron. And finally, something I think we all see coming up around this time of the year, a fairly recent use of Egyptian motif in sort of a popular culture, this float design from the 2008 Rex Parade. The very simple early Gothic buildings of New Orleans are perhaps best identified by the first Protestant church in the city on near Lafayette Square, but on St. Charles between Gravier and Union Streets. It was designed by William Brand, a cornerstone laid in 1819, and it was, even though pretty simple and sort of maybe antiseptically Gothic, it was described in the city directories as a Gothic church in both the 1822 and 1838 city directories. When Theodore Clapp left the Presbyterian Church and began the Congregationalist Unitarian Church, this was known as the Strangers' Church, and it was destroyed by fire in 1851. And you can see as the St. Charles Hotel burns in this picture, the little church to the left of the canvas is just sort of waiting to be consumed by the flames that destroyed the hotel that was its neighbor across the street. Perhaps more traditionally Gothic in some ways of thinking is the Catholic Church of St. Patrick's that was built in the late 1830s on Camp Street is still there today. You can see it again with its sort of more familiar streetscape in this photograph by Charles Frank from the 1920s. Not all of those buildings in this picture survive, but most of them that are visible here are still part of our architectural streetscape. Moving back to perhaps something more like the Protestant churches, the Christ Episcopal Church on Canal Street. This was at the corner of Dauphine, the downtown lake corner where the Maison Blanche building, or across from the Maison Blanche building, and designed by Thomas Wharton. You can see, again, a pretty austere Gothic style, but the lancet windows that punctuate the facade, and again, the archwork and the quatrefoil designs inside those trusses on the interior of the church kind of all speak to a Gothic pedigree. This little kind of ruined, fake ruined abbey that was built in Metairie Cemetery picks up on the Gothic style, and we see here in the photograph by Clarence Lachlan, it was used as a setting for one of his symbolic photographs. D.H. Holmes, the original building on Canal Street, chose Gothic as a motif for its architecture. And again, if you recall the little paired lancet windows of Christ Church, you can begin to see that in here. And the Holmes building, those sort of applied architectural elements, both in the gallery and in the windows and hoods above them on the third and fourth floor. You see the use of cast iron ornamentation that made a lot of these styles much more possible. In residential architecture, there's the plan for the Cuthbert Bullitt cottage, or at least it was designed for Cuthbert Bullitt, but it was built for another person, Charles Briggs. Bullitt's fortunes kind of took a turn at the time this was being done. Briggs liked the design and had it executed. It still stands today behind a pretty big screen of vegetation at the corner of Britannia and 3rd Street, but there's just a few contemporary slides that will show you how much the design that Gallier did in 1849 was carried through in the architecture that we see today. Again, the pointed arches, the quatrefoil motif in the roundel in the gable, and those kind of angular versions of an ogee form of arch that support the colonnade at the very bottom of the slide. Just a couple of slides of a Gothic style state capitol that was built in Baton Rouge. I like the quotation that Mark Twain has about this. Twain did not like this building, and in Life Along the Mississippi, he describes it. It is pathetic enough that a whitewashed castle with turrets and things should ever be built in this otherwise honorable place. But it is more pathetic to see this architectural falsehood undergoing restoration and perpetuation in our day, when it would have been so easy to let the dynamite finish what a charitable fire began, and then devote this restoration money to the building of something genuine. Don't sugarcoat it. But, again, Clarence Lachlan found this to be a pretty interesting building to photograph. This next few slides are from the interior. You can see this great central curving staircase that goes up through the multiple levels of this building and to a dome. I hope you can see in the banister the Gothic arch motifs that form the railing, and it sort of terminates in this magnificent explosion of an iron column and a stained glass dome under that roof. Also near Baton Rouge, another example of Gothic residential architecture, Afton Villa, built in the decade or so before the Civil War. and burned in 1962. It does not survive as a building anymore. We only know it through these photographs. Let's see. This building is, of course, the subject of the cover of Cultural Vistas. I wanted to just show one or two slides of it. It's just astonishing that this building exists in New Orleans, and not only once but twice. It was built in first built in 1858. Probably soil conditions led to its structural failure beginning in the 1920s, and using a lot of the existing materials from the original building, and also following the original plans pretty carefully, the building was essentially reconstructed. And this is the interior of the church during part of that reconstruction. And I just show you that they didn't invent this stuff from thin air. The mosque and cathedral in Cordoba has a lot of that same feeling, just kind of on a scale that's what seems like 1,000,000 times bigger. But it's a pretty faithful adaptation of Moorish inspiration. Close with just a slide or two of something much more modest. This little shotgun house, and I think it's the 2200 block of Royal. And like many shotgun houses, it's all about the facade. The sides of this house are just kind of unrelieved, plain weatherboards with just serviceable windows. Nothing like the ornamentation you see here. But again, this sort of thing, you see it in the real deal, if you will. And I just show these examples from Moorish architecture in Spain to do that, and just to show that the cemetery did not escape the influence of Moorish design. There's this final slide of the Casson tomb in Metairie Cemetery, and again with its kind of real world or historical reference. And I thank you for your attention, and if we have time, Brian, questions? Or